This is Pixie doing another video. Right, just gonna get myself on the main road. So I've started doing, I still do my fasting, but I've let it slip a little bit. And I was doing a bit of a fruitarian thing, mixing it up. This time of the year it's more festive, so people offer you more food's been available, etc. So I've eaten a bit more, and I think it's very quick to put on weight as well, so I've got to be very careful. So I decided recently, how about I give a bit of Carnivore a go. So I'm going to try a bit of Carnivore and see where that takes me. So I'll see how I feel tomorrow. I mean, pretty much today I had some mince beef, I had 3 eggs, and I had these like cocktail sausages, and I chucked them and I cooked them with a bit of butter. It's either that or lard. Lard's okay as well. And I'm okay to say, right, well I can add herbs into it, but I'm not going to be sort of like sticking tomatoes in it and other things. I'm going to hold back on anything like that, and lots of veggies and so on. But what I will be looking at is adding different meats. So the way I look at it, I had a chicken, I had some beef, and with the eggs. And what I'm looking to do is possibly I need to get some lamb in the mix, or some pork mince. We'll mix them together. You can make like patty things, all sorts of stuff. It's fairly plain. That's why I can add the herbs and spices, and there's other ways you can do it as well. Like you could heat up the oils. Like if I had butter or I had lard, I could add something to it before I do the main part of the cooking. I had some basil in there, so I didn't see any problem. A dry herb's not going to cause any massive change, and the main focus of this carnivore is to be sort of 80 to 90% animal based in what you're cooking and so on. Because when you've got things like butter and it might have other things added to it, have a look at these things. It's a bit like I was having Bovril as a drink, but it's got a few other extracts I chucked in there as well for the flavour. So I have to look at it. So the majority might be some kind of animal carcass, cell salts and all sorts of other bits. Some iron, if it's got any stuff from the marrow, that's perfectly fine. You could easily make your own broth, to be honest. You just have to get a slow cooker and cook down some bones and make that mixture. So it's kind of more. There's other reasons as well. So I'm looking at the genetics. I'm okay with fruit, and I can do eat a lot of bananas, and that seems to fill me up. That's fine. So for my genetic heritage, I've got sort of it links up to the Mediterranean, so it's possibly a little bit into the Black Sea, the Russian area of it, Caucasian mountains, all that sort of region. So some bloodline runs across there, and then the other ones, there's some Scandinavian mix in there as well. I had, when I did a genetic test, it was kind of like the genes exist in the mix. So I can have a red-haired child, I can have a blonde-haired child, and the likelihood as well. So I've got I carry two red hair gene markers, which means that they're from 2 different types of red. There's about 3 different genes to make red hair. I think you've got potentially from different types of red hair. So I've got 2, so that's interesting. And the other one's sort of Scandinavian connections. That's really Vikings, and the Vikings would have probably gone into Ireland. Some of my dad's. There's also a connection with people that migrated from the Mediterranean into Ireland and took some of them sort of genetic structure there, mixed it up into the mainland. It could even be because there was Vikings, there was a lot of slavery at one point. Slavery is quite old than people realise. and a chunk of Ireland was about slavery. I think Dublin means dark waters or something like that, and they got some of their heritage from the Vikings. But the Vikings used to be pretty nasty arseholes, actually. At least when, say, Africans were they were enslaved. What the difference to the Vikings, they used to castrate them as well. So that very concept must be pretty horrific, getting your gear chopped off and then used in an area. I don't know, some cop car coming down or something. I'm sort of ahead of him, he's catching up. I don't know where he is though. There's an ambulance. Find somewhere to pull over. So so basically diet links up to the areas. So at first it's not so noticeable. Like, I love olives. Olives are really tasty. I didn't used to be so much into them. I didn't mind things like sardines and things like that. Lately I've gone into, but would I have to look with tomato sauce? I might have sardines on their own, but less tasty. They're nice with tomato sauce. The old olive oil. And so the other section of it is more into the north. So eating a lot of meat is not a problem. And then there's this another faction as well in there, is that there's possibly a Jewish bloodline in the mix. Which is the Khazarian genetic Ashkenazi type bloodlines. So it's interesting. So there's a few things I've done. I did like this genetics test, and it came out with lots of things. There were some theories about where it could be, and the way some of the ancestors looked as well. And then there's a bit of comparing. So, for instance, if I was from a particular region or village, I thought there was some genetic ancestry, I could Google local people, and then you look at their faces and you think, well, that's, do I look anything like anybody in the local blood, the genetic variants there? Because there's bound to be a face of similarities in some way, like the face shape or stuff like that. And also things like with Russians and so on, they got the Viking connection in there. It's just not really fully understood. I mean, they would be aware of it so much, but it's obviously the Vikings were far spread out, and that's why they got the symbols and the language looks the way it does. So yeah, it helps in a certain amount of research. I don't know about moles. There's something I think about moles earlier. Would that mean that my bloodline's bred with say somebody of an African descent? It's stuff about Lucy. We're not apes. We're not bloody primates. We've got less chromosomes. They've got other things that we don't possess. Like their strength and all sorts of things, and also where they're born as well. But it could be that you could take a life form, anything is a chromosome, you could take a life form and you put them in stressful situations, and it causes a genesis, their DNA to start changing. There was also this theory that if you gave a chimpanzee, say you gave them magic mushrooms, that you could cause them to evolve because it would stimulate the brain and cause a genetic activation, I guess. Resequencing. You resequence the genetics or the genes. There's something about that, because basically you have hardwired neural networks, and you've probably got soft-wired things as well, things you don't really access but you'd used to as a child. Like some people lost the ability to imagine. They don't use their imagination much, or They have to be sort of told what to think. They can't just construct things in their mind. But maybe they did when they were a child. So that's all in there. And so what happens is when it's other parts of the brain are switched off, they kick in. And this is what happens with rewiring the brain and psychedelics. It would be an interesting experiment if you could give, it's probably not a nice one, in essence, if you're giving chimpanzee psychedelic food. There you go, beautiful. Well, it'd be interesting, because then they could do is a brain scan on them, and would it make them evolve? So the reason for the experiment would be to see if you could make a species evolve by altering its food. Same way in a stomach bacteria, if you had introduced new bacteria into the stomach of a chimpanzee and started altering some of this diet, what would happen? And the dark side of that is if we remove bacteria from our own gut and take things out, chemicals that can stimulate, take the kind of neurotropic stimulants, things that stimulate you intellectually, out of society. Like somebody outlawed rosemary as a herb, and well, they pretty much have. It's a cannabinoid system. So if you outlaw things that stimulate the brain, you might have a population whose brain becomes less active, and so it become more sedentary, maybe intellectually. They get programmed basically. You're becoming the machine, and this is the problem with technology. Is we wanted to make technology more universal to work with humans, but what we've done is we made humans work with technology. And so you've got people that sound like robots on the telephone and operating machines and stuff. It's efficiency driven, and we don't have any sort of lacking of initiative. There was some job I remember in the past, and actually if you had too much initiative, you wouldn't get the job. What would you do with a customer complaint and doing something else? You just got to carry on with what you've been told to do. If you go off and deal with the complaint, then you broke the rules. That was what was said. So anyway, that's a bit of a long distance from where I wanted to be. There's so many ambulances tonight. What is going on? And police cars and all sorts. Another night in Reading. Anyway, back to my diet stuff. So there's two kind of stressors, and there's two things that can activate ancient genes. So I've mentioned as possibly Mediterranean type foods, because of some genetic connection there. There's also other things. There was something actually Thomas DeLonghi he mentioned in one of his videos. Now he's got blue eyes and blonde hair, and originally the blue eye gene is somewhere in the Mediterranean. So he's talking about Mediterranean OMAD or something, or intermittent fasting, and that would probably work well with him because he's got a genetic marker there. Certain foods like maybe seafood, olives, these sorts of things that probably do quite well in his biology, because his body was exposed to it for thousands of years, his genetics, and so they know a lot about it. Their body understands how to break it down because it's fine-tuned that once it's triggered. So for myself, but then equally you've got other genetic lines that connect to other places, so meat as well. There's going to be times where there wasn't fruit and vegetables available until you got to live off meat. I mean, there's even arguments about people that have a cannibalistic resistance to guri. That's this kind of like brain disease you get from brain matter, I think, if you eat it, of a relative. It causes some sort of the protein ends up replicating or something. And I think basically what happens if living DNA goes into a person, it will try to connect up with the current DNA in it, and it causes a kind of like a biohack that goes wrong. And you develop this kind of protein that inhibits your brain function. So there probably is natural cycles in the brain whereby the body shuts down active genes. It could be when they died that the brain released a chemical to shut itself down to function. So it's like the death mode, and by eating it, you're introducing this kind of this death hormone into your brain or something. Something that's causing you not to be stimulated by it, but the reverse, and end up with this like mad cow's disease that they originally have. So these genetic resistant genes exist in these different functions. So they were triggered by a problem or a stressor, and then they came into play. And they're all in there, if you depend on your background. I mean, some people may have a natural disposition to being a vegetarian, and a vegetarian diet may work very well with them. They may have a slender frame, the body may have a sort of certain demand to different. So for me, meat is one of the things from the northern side of the European bloodline, and possibly the Jewish thing. There was some issues around the liver, things like Crohn's disease and so on. So there's foods that are probably needed for metabolic functions, and there may be functions that I don't need certain foods because I don't use them. Some people have got, let's say, they don't have a gallbladder and things, so they might have other organs that are using more than others. We don't know the full extent of the human body, basically. We've got ideas, but it's just they're just comparisons based on other things we come across. So it's work in science, so it's not a perfected one. It's kind of in the process of being worked through, and everyone's individual. So I'm incorporating that into the OMAD, what possibly my body wants, and also I want to get myself back on target with weight loss and improvement, and my body's obviously become accustomed to certain dietary changes, and then I've also possibly become a bit lax. I'm still around the same weight ratio of about 17 stone. It's just I was at one point below that. I was like 16 and a half, and that's probably pushing myself. And fats contain a lot of water, and people talk about water weight loss with meats and in a more kind of carnivore based diet. So I'll give it a go and see what happens with that. The other thing I was going to talk about was into the MGTOW, and I was just doing some thinking around these things, because typically there's the kind of honey trap, I guess, for some men. Now, it's all right if you love kids, but there seems to be a lot of women that have had children with somebody, it hasn't worked out, and naturally they're looking for someone to support them and them children. It could also be that they had children with somebody and they decided he wasn't good enough, and now they want to look for somebody better, or they're kind of their directives, or the drivers in them have changed, so they're interested more in money. Maybe they had a child with somebody very healthy, a very sort of strong-minded male, and now they've got an issue is that he was strong in one way, but he had lacked resources, so they're looking for somebody else to support them, or maybe he just went off and slept with some other women, so he wasn't loyal, so he lacked some other qualities that are probably maybe a female deep in their mind psychologically thinks they can learn it. Like, if somebody's very admirable, that they can develop them skills. They won't become crooked like maybe their dad was or something. So from my side of things, I'm looking at, just kind of avoid them areas. I don't want to fall into this thing where I've got some lady with so many children, because it's not what I'm looking for at the moment. I've had people, if they want to do that, that's fine. My driving force may be somebody's financially more stable, good healthy genes. Maybe she wants children. If she does want children, or if I want to have children with someone, I'll probably want to pick someone a lot younger, and maybe I should break the taboo. If in a country they're quite open to an older man and a younger woman, give it a go. I mean, it's not going to cause any harm, and if I treat the other person with respect and so on, and the chemistry's good and other things, and the business side I mentioned before, some relationships are like businesses, and that element I'm going to explore, because I didn't really before. I was just following a prime desire to fall in love and settle down, which is a lot of beta type males have. Anyway, this is Piggy sign off and speak to you soon.